Our world is strange, and the people who call it home are even strangers, but you don't really believe that until you stand in front of something so massive, so impossibly precise, that it feels like it shouldn't exist on Earth. Not in the time it was built, not with the tools they had, and not with the level of perfection no one still can't explain. Across the planet, from deserts to mountains, these monuments stand as reminders that we've forgotten more than we remember, so join us for today's video as we take a look at the 15 most mysterious monuments on Earth. Number 15. Persepolis. Persepolis was never meant to hide. Built to be seen, praised, and remembered, it was the ceremonial capital of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. It wasn't just a seat of power, it was power carved into stone, raised on an immense terrace in the middle of the desert. Its palaces, staircases, and reliefs don't whisper history, they declare it. Every wall still holds on to the presence of kings who called themselves rulers of the world. No fortifications were needed, 10,000 guards stood ready, a display of dominance that spoke louder than battlements ever could. But in 330 BC, all of it burned. Alexander the Great took the city, looted its treasures, and left fire in his wake. The ruins remain, scorched but still standing, like they're waiting for the next chapter that never came. Persepolis didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it believed it never would, and that belief still lingers in the silence between its stones. Number 14. Hvalsey. When you look at Hvalsey, it doesn't feel abandoned. It feels just paused. Set against the wind-brushed fjords of southern Greenland, it's the most well-preserved Norse ruin in the Americas. These stones have outlasted the people who laid them, the ceremonies they hosted, and the cold that still creeps through their cracks. Around the early 14th century, Norse settlers from Iceland carved out a life here, farmers, traders, explorers, some of the first Europeans to set foot this far west. At the center stood a church, built from stone thick enough to stand for centuries and tall enough to draw eyes even now. That church was the backdrop for a wedding in 1408, the last written record of anyone living here. After that, the story stops. No war, no plague, no documented reason. The people vanished, but the structure stayed, stoic, silent, and impossibly well made. Hvalsey doesn't answer questions, it creates them. And when the fog rolls in off the water, it feels less like a ruin and more like a memory someone left behind. Number 13. Newgrange. Newgrange is older than the pyramids, older than most myths, and older even than written language in these parts of the world. It's not just a tomb, though that's the word historians like to use. It's a message carved in stone, buried under the earth, and lit by the sun once a year with eerie precision. The winter solstice sunrise doesn't just shine inside the chamber, it pierces it, as if the builders wanted the light to do more than warm the walls. Irish folklore ties Newgrange to the Tuatha De Danann, a mythic people said to possess supernatural knowledge. Whether they existed or not, someone built this monument with an understanding of time, space, and symbolism that still challenges modern minds. The spirals etched into the stone speak in a language no one has fully translated, and yet every year, when that beam of sunlight crawls across the floor, it feels like someone somewhere is still listening. Newgrange isn't a relic, it's a ritual still alive, still unfolding. If you want to know the full truth, well, you can visit for yourself. Number 12. Carnac stones. Somewhere between wild grass and wind-carved farmland in Brittany, over 3,000 stones are standing like they've got something to say but never do. They're not scattered. They're arranged in lines, rows, shapes that make sense to someone, but not us. Taller stones sit at one end, and as you walk, they shrink. That's no accident. It's an alignment designed by minds that lived thousands of years ago, long before blueprints and long before names were etched into things. There's no writing, no carvings, just presence. These aren't leftovers, they're statements. We just don't speak the language, and yet they've survived. Storms, centuries, civilizations falling and rising again, but ask what they mean. You'll only get guesses, calendars, ceremonies, burials, all maybes. It's the kind of silence that follows you around after you leave, like something just brushed past your shoulder but vanished when you turned. The Carnac stones don't need to explain themselves, they just keep standing, and we keep not knowing. Number 11. Pyramids of Meroe. Far from tourist trails and spotlighted documentaries, the pyramids of Meroe rise from the golden sands of Sudan like a forgotten skyline. There are over 200 of them, sharp-edged, steep-sided, and clustered tightly together, built not by the Egyptian dudes but by the Nubian Kushite kings who ruled this land for centuries. These structures were never meant to copy Giza. They reflect their own distinct power, their own buried traditions. Many still hold burial chambers within, decorated with vivid paintings and royal relics, but the language etched into their walls remains unread. The Kushite script has defied all modern attempts at translation, making each pyramid a sealed chapter in a book we can't quite open. Roman scribes mention the kingdom. Ancient trade routes pass through its borders. Yet, despite ruling for more than 3,000 years, their voice remains mostly silent. The sand preserved what little remains. And while the wind still howls across Meroe's stones, it carries no names, only the shadows of a once mighty people whose legacy was carved in a code we may never break. Number 10. Goseck Circle. In the middle of Saxony-Anhalt, far from anything modern, sits a circular monument built before metal tools were even a thing. The Goseck Circle looks simple, just ditches, dirt, and reconstructed wooden walls, but its purpose reaches beyond guesswork. Dated to around 4,900 BC, this Neolithic structure has 3 precisely aligned openings carved into its perimeter. They line up not randomly, but with the sunrise and sunset during the winter solstice. That's not a coincidence. This was an intentional blueprint. Early humans didn't just hunt and survive. They observed, they watched the sky. They marked time, and they built something that could keep up with it. Still, not everything adds up. Archaeologists uncovered scattered human bones outside the wooden palisades, including a headless skeleton. That detail changed the tone of the site almost instantly. Some believe this wasn't just a calendar. It may have doubled as a ritual ground. Nothing confirms that theory entirely, but the structure's precision and the remains it holds suggest this wasn't a space for casual gatherings. Something deeper was happening here. Number 9. Submerged Ruins of Alexandria. The shoreline of Alexandria hides a city beneath its waves, a place once filled with courtyards, columns, and voices that belonged to pharaohs. Cleopatra's royal quarter, swallowed by the Mediterranean after a series of ancient earthquakes, now rests on the seafloor like a memory sealed in water. Carved heads stare from beneath layers of silt. Temples once lit by torches now sway with the current. Bronze statues, mosaic floors, and shattered columns lie where they fell, untouched for centuries. Instead of excavating these ruins, Egypt plans to leave them where they are, offering underwater tours through the flooded remains. What was once a political powerhouse and cultural epicenter has become a quiet graveyard of marble and coral. There is no script playing underwater, no grand narration echoing through the deep, just silence and ruins. Those who dive here do not see a legend brought to life. They see what happens when time collapses into the sea and leaves beauty behind, hidden where only the curious dare to go. Number 8. Palenque. Palenque is the largest Mayan site, but it doesn't overwhelm you with size. It draws you in with detail. Tucked into the jungle of Chiapas, this ruined city-state feels like it's half swallowed by trees, half whispering from stone. At its height, it was a thriving capital, one that valued the art of storytelling as much as power. That's why the inscriptions carved into its temples are so neatly preserved. They weren't just decoration, they were a public record, a visual archive of royal lives, spiritual beliefs, and historical memory. The Temple of the Inscriptions holds the tomb of Tikal the Great, a ruler who shaped the city's legacy and whose carved portrait still stares out across centuries. The architecture here bends with the land rather than trying to control it, and the sculpture has a kind of softness not often found in ancient ruins. Palenque is a place where the past doesn't echo, it speaks plainly and beautifully, in a language we're still learning to translate. Number 7. Prambanan Temple. Prambanan rises out of the plains near Yogyakarta like a volcanic memory, a forest of stone towers, each carved with stories from another time. Built in the 10th century as an offering to the Hindu Trinity, its 3 central temples are shaped by devotion, one for Brahma, one for Vishnu, and the tallest 47 meters of vertical symmetry for Shiva. That towering spire doesn't just dominate the skyline, it defines it, but this wasn't just a religious site. It was a statement of culture, identity, and craftsmanship. After the fall of ancient Java, nature took the complex back, wrapping it in vines and silence until its rediscovery centuries later. Earthquakes fractured it, time wore it down, and still what remains has the weight of something too precise to have ever been casual. Every relief carving, every alignment, was deliberate. And even in its partial ruin, it feels complete, as if the pieces missing don't take away from its story but deepen the mystery of what was once possible. Number 6. Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku stands exposed to the Bolivian highlands, windswept and monumental, holding on to secrets from a time when cities were raised without concrete or colonizers. It existed long before the Inca rose to power, yet even they regarded it as sacred ground. What remains today is a fractured blueprint of a civilization that understood astronomy, agriculture, and architecture far beyond what their tools should have allowed. The Akapana Pyramid still marks the spiritual center, not grand in scale but charged with intent. Nearby sits the Gateway of the Sun, carved from a single stone block, etched with figures that might be deities or calendars, or both. The Kalasasaya platform, an ancient observatory built to track the skies with unsettling accuracy, once aligned perfectly with the solstices. Beneath the surface, archaeologists found irrigation systems and farming fields engineered with channels to fight off drought, solutions that feel more futuristic than prehistoric. Tiwanaku doesn't just raise questions, it just stares you down. Number 5. Banteay Srei. Banteay Srei doesn't try to dominate the landscape like Angkor Wat, and let's say it doesn't really need to. What it lacks in scale, it makes up for in precision, red sandstone carved with such impossible delicacy that entire myths unfold on the temple walls like frozen theater. Dedicated to Shiva in the 10th century, it sits about 25 kilometers from the main Angkor complex, tucked away like something that was never meant for crowds. Unlike most temples of the time, it wasn't commissioned by a king. The story passed down says it was built by scholars or perhaps artisans outside the royal bloodline, possibly even women, which would have been unthinkable then. Whether that's true or not, the carvings themselves feel different, less like declarations of power and more like personal sacred devotion. The figures have depth, emotion, and intention. The temple doesn't just display mythology, it translates it. Banteay Srei isn't imposing, it's intimate, and somehow that makes it feel even more eternal. What do you say? Number 4. Megalithic temples. High on the cliffs of Malta, where the sea crashes endlessly into ancient rock, a series of temples still stand, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and older than almost any monument still left on Earth. Built before 3000 BC, with stones that weigh more than 20 tons each, these structures were not thrown together by chance. Hasar Kim and Majdra were aligned to the solstices, allowing the sun to enter at precise angles on only 2 days of the year. Igantija, the oldest of them all, means place of giants, and looking at the size of the stones, that name doesn't feel like an exaggeration. There are no blueprints, no written records, and no signs of a civilization large enough to support such construction. Everything about these temples suggests purpose and design, but by people whose existence left almost no trace beyond these walls. The deeper the study goes, the stranger it becomes. These are not ruins of forgotten villages. They are messages from people who vanished long before history began. Number 3. Mesa Verde cliff dwellings. The ancient homes at Mesa Verde still cling to their sandstone shelters as if the people just left, but they didn't. Generations ago, the ancestral Pueblones lived here, carved entire communities into the rock face, and built homes that blended into the mesa itself. These weren't temporary shelters. They were engineered dwellings, some with multiple stories, connected rooms, towers, and sacred kivas used for ceremony and storytelling. Life unfolded on 2 levels, farming on the flat mesa tops above and living in the cool shade of the cliffs below. For nearly a century, these cliff homes were alive with sound and firelight. Then, sometime in the 13th century, people started moving south. The departure wasn't chaotic. There's no sign of war or disaster. They left carefully, intentionally. Some think drought drove them out. Others point to spiritual shifts. The truth, still unclear, but what they left behind still stands, weathered but strong, holding space for a culture that reshaped the land without ever trying to conquer it. Number 2. Georgia Guidestones. In rural Georgia, far from anything you'd expect to find mysterious, 4 massive granite slabs once stood in the shape of a compass. They weren't ancient, they weren't weathered, but they carried a tension that made them feel older than they were. Built in 1980, the Georgia Guidestones arrived with no clear explanation. A man calling himself R.C. Christian commissioned the monument, gave vague instructions, and disappeared. No one ever heard from him again. The stones were carved with a 10-point message written in 8 languages, offering guidelines for rebuilding civilization. One of those guidelines called for keeping the human population below 500 million. Another spoke of aligning humanity with nature. The phrasing was poetic but unsettling. Some read it as a post-apocalyptic blueprint. Others saw it as quiet extremism dressed up as wisdom. Over time, it drew everything from conspiracy theories to violent protests. In 2022, part of it was destroyed. What remains isn't just a pile of stone. It's the echo of a message that was never truly understood, left standing with more questions than answers. Number 1. Tikal. Well, Tikal doesn't need to be uncovered. It rises. Out of the thick canopy of the Peten jungle, massive stone temples pierce the treetops, their peaks catching sunlight while their bases disappear into roots and shadow. Once a major center of the Mayan world, Tikal was more than a city. It was a cosmic map. Its temples align with the sun and stars, every placement deliberate, as though architecture and astronomy were one and the same. At its height, it held tens of thousands of people, yet for centuries, it sat in silence, swallowed by the forest, forgotten by history. When archaeologists began clearing the site in the 19th century, they didn't just find buildings, they found time frozen mid-breath. The soundscape is different here. Wind filters through stone corridors, and howler monkeys scream from the trees like something ancient never left. Tikal was abandoned long before the conquest, for reasons still debated. But the city doesn't feel empty. It feels paused, like it remembers more than it lets on. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon.